To understand the absolute audacity of his ultimatum, you need to understand the toxic environment Greg came from. Greg's family was old-school wealthy. Not billionaire wealthy, but they had a successful chain of hardware stores in the Midwest and an inflated sense of their own importance. His mother, an incredibly bitter woman named Martha, constantly reminded me that my sole purpose in life was to provide a male heir to inherit the empire. When I had my first daughter, Mia, they forced a smile. When I had twins, Lily and Chloe, 2 years later, Martha actually sighed out loud at the baby shower and said, "Well, at least they're pretty. Maybe they'll marry well." When Emma, our fourth, arrived, Greg completely checked out. He stopped coming to parent-teacher conferences. He stopped playing with them in the yard. If the girls ran up to hug him when he got home from work, he would gently push them aside and say, "Daddy's tired. Go find your mother." But while he was pulling away, I was leaning in. I never wanted my girls to feel like they were a disappointment. I poured every ounce of love, attention, and education into them. And while I was doing that, I was also quietly working. You see, Greg loved to play the big, successful provider. He loved boasting to his friends about how he took care of his girls. But the truth was a heavily guarded secret that Greg's fragile ego couldn't handle anyone knowing. I was the one keeping us afloat. Before we got married, I had launched a boutique software consulting firm. When the girls were born, I transitioned to working entirely from home, late at night or while they were at school. Greg's family business was actually struggling, and for the last 3 years, my income was the only thing paying the mortgage on our 5-bedroom suburban house. My income funded his leased luxury truck. I let him put his name on the bills to protect his pride. I let him pretend to be the king of the castle. I was willing to keep playing that game forever, just to keep our family intact. Until the night he gave me that ultimatum. Give me a son or leave. Those words echoed in my head for days. I didn't yell when he said it. I just looked at him, nodded slowly, and walked away. But the coldness in his eyes, it was too specific. It wasn't just frustration, it was the look of a man who already had a backup plan. My intuition screamed at me that something else was going on. So, the next day, while he was at work, I did something I had never done in 10 years of marriage. I logged into our joint cellular account and checked his call logs. There was one number he was texting hundreds of times a week. Late at night, during his lunch breaks, I paid a private investigator $1,500. It took them exactly 48 hours to bring me a manila folder filled with everything I needed. Greg wasn't just having an affair. He had been seeing a 24-year-old receptionist from his office for 6 months. And the cherry on top? The photos in the folder showed them walking out of an OB/GYN clinic. She was pregnant. I felt physically sick. I sat at my kitchen island, looking at photos of my husband kissing a woman 10 years younger than me, holding an ultrasound picture. I later found out through the PI's report that she had already done the early gender reveal blood test. She was having a boy. That's why he was suddenly so brave. That's why he gave me the ultimatum. He didn't want me to try for a boy. He already had his male heir on the way. He wanted me to refuse, so he could play the victim, kick me out, and move his pregnant mistress into the house that I was secretly paying for. He thought I was going to be the weeping, discarded first wife. He had no idea that he had just awakened a monster. I didn't confront him. Toxic, narcissistic men thrive on your emotional reactions. They want you to scream and cry so they can call you crazy. I decided to give him absolute, terrifying silence. I played the role of the submissive, defeated wife perfectly. I told him I needed a few weeks to think about his ultimatum. He smirked, assuming I was scrambling to figure out how to survive without him. Meanwhile, I went to war. I hired the most ruthless, expensive divorce attorney in the state. I handed her my financial records. I proved that the down payment on the house came exclusively from my premarital assets and that every mortgage payment for the last 36 months came from my business account because we lived in an equitable distribution state and because I had absolute, undeniable proof of his infidelity and his squandering of marital funds on his mistress. My lawyer drafted a masterpiece of a divorce settlement. I also secured a beautiful, newly renovated 4-bedroom rental home 2 towns over in a phenomenal school district. I quietly began moving my daughter's most precious belongings, clothes and toys, into a storage unit while they were at school. I arranged everything flawlessly. On a Friday morning, 4 weeks after his ultimatum, Greg kissed me on the cheek and said, "I'm going on a weekend fishing trip with the boys. Have an answer for me by Sunday night, Elena." I knew he wasn't going fishing. He was going to a bed and breakfast with his pregnant mistress. The moment his truck turned the corner, I sprang into action. I called professional movers. Within 6 hours, every piece of furniture I had purchased, every television, every rug, and every dish was loaded into a truck. I left the house completely, utterly barren. I left him his clothes in the closet, a single folding chair in the living room, and a mattress on the floor. I took my daughters, picked up some pizzas, and we drove to our beautiful new home. They were thrilled, thinking it was a fun adventure. Then, I drove back to the empty house to wait for Greg. Greg didn't come home on Sunday night. He came home on Monday afternoon. I was sitting in the empty living room on the single folding chair, wearing a tailored suit, sipping a coffee. I heard his key turn in the lock. The door opened. Greg stepped inside, completely freezing in his tracks. His jaw actually unhinged as he looked around at the echoing, barren walls of his once beautiful home. What the hell is this?" he stammered, dropping his duffel bag. "Where is all our stuff? Where are the girls?" I stood up, walked over to him, and handed him a thick manila folder. "You asked for my answer, Greg," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "Here it is." He frantically opened the folder. Inside were the divorce papers. The motion for full primary custody of our 4 daughters. The financial injunction cutting off his access to my business accounts. And right on top, an 8x10 glossy photograph of him kissing his mistress outside the OB/GYN clinic. All the blood drained from his face. He looked like a ghost. "Elena, He choked out, his arrogance completely evaporating. "Don't speak," I interrupted him, stepping closer. I didn't raise my voice, but the venom in my tone made him take a physical step backward. "You wanted a son. Congratulations, you're getting one. But you are not going to disrespect my daughters ever again. And you are certainly not going to do it in a house that I pay for. You can't take the house." He panicked, his voice cracking. "I'm the man of the house," I smiled, a genuine, icy smile. "I'm selling the house, Greg," I replied smoothly. "My lawyer already forced the motion, and since your family's hardware business is currently drowning in debt, and I am officially revoking my financial support, you can't afford to buy me out. You have 30 days to vacate before it goes on the market." He fell to his knees. Literally dropped to his knees on the hardwood floor, crying. The man who had demanded a male heir, the man who had looked at his beautiful daughters with disgust, was now sobbing like an infant, begging me to reconsider, begging me not to destroy him. I looked down at him, felt absolutely nothing, and walked out the front door. That was 3 years ago. The divorce was brutal, but I destroyed him in court. Because of his documented infidelity and financial drain, I walked away with the vast majority of our assets. I got full primary custody of the girls. He gets supervised visitation every other weekend, which he rarely uses. His life completely unraveled. Without my income, he couldn't afford his luxury truck, which was repossessed. His family's business finally filed for bankruptcy. And that young mistress, when she realized Greg wasn't actually a wealthy provider, she left him just 2 months after their son was born, taking him for whatever little child support he had left. Last I heard, Greg is living in a tiny apartment, working a miserable mid-level sales job, completely alone. Meanwhile, my business has doubled in size. We live in a beautiful home filled with laughter, art, and joy. Mia is a straight-A student. The twins are dominating their soccer league, and little Emma is the brightest, happiest child you will ever meet. They don't miss him, because a father is someone who protects and values you, not someone who bases your worth on your gender. Society constantly conditions women to believe that if we leave a marriage, we will be broken, that we should stay for the kids, tolerate the disrespect, and shrink ourselves to protect a man's ego. But I am here to tell you that there is nothing more powerful than a mother protecting her young. When you finally stop pouring your energy into a man who doesn't value you, you have the power to build an empire. Never apologize for being a woman, and never let anyone make your daughters feel like they are second best. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to protect your children, let me know in the comments below. You are incredibly brave,